There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn, the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. And this is part 2 of a discussion with the Calgary, Alberta novelist and reader of novellas, Barb Howard. When we're talking about novellas, in particular, we're talking about some novellas that we recommended to each other in part 1 of this chat. And now it's time for the big reveal about how we felt about those novellas, the ones that we did read. So welcome back, Barb.
Hi, Shawn. Nice to be back on your channel.
And you're wearing glasses this time, so maybe the print on some of these novellas was too hard on your eyes.
I've got teeny tiny notes written on some of them, so yeah.
They're very cool glasses. So I want to know where you got them. So yeah, we're just going to check in with certain of these novels as we're just kind of spontaneously chatting about them. If you haven't read any of these novels, Barb and I are not going to worry about spoilers as we discuss them. So you might not want to watch this video until you have read any of the ones that you wish to read. We have a non-spoilery introduction to each of these novels in part 1 of these videos, so that might be the place for you to watch before, and then decide which ones you want to read before you watch part 2. Otherwise, if you don't care about spoilers particularly, please make yourself a cup of coffee and sit down. We're going to reference some of the general principles that we discussed last time about what makes a novella, what is a novella, what are the distinguishing features of a novella as compared to a short story or a novel. Those things will crop up spontaneously as we go, but let's just hear. I'm dying to hear how you made out with the books of the novellas of mine that you read. So what's the one you're going to start with?
Oh, well, I read them all, liked them all. Should we go time-wise through them, maybe? Start with
I'll do the same.
Okay, well, maybe it's in terms of publication. Why don't we start with Country Dance, which was your suggestion from Margiad Evans, I think.
Margiad Evans, published, I believe, in 1930. 1930.
I love that. I wouldn't have read it if I hadn't been here and you hadn't recommended it.
Good.
Super interested in this, containing 2 worlds, Welsh and English, or a border story, that sort of thing. I love that aspect of it. The drawings in the version that I had, which were cool, I didn't do it for me. You think?
No, I think they're terrible. They're by her. She drew them. So that's why they're there, but no, she's not. She should have stuck to writing, I think.
That explains it. Then I was like, why are they here? They're distracting. Yeah, a bit like a child did them or something, which I might have tied into another book, but not that one. I'm embarrassed that I didn't really know if they were based on real letters or if that, beginning bit talking about the letters was also made up.
So well, that's a good question. It's been many years since I've read it, but I was under the impression when I did read it, and I read it while being in dialogue with an Anglo-Welsh friend who has done scholarship on this novel and on this writer. And as far as my memory, it is all fiction.
Oh, yeah. So then she did a foreword to talk about the letters. And the foreword, if it's fiction, that's like mind-blowing for me.
Oh, see, I don't remember the foreword is. I don't remember the foreword. Give me more. What was it? What else was in that foreword? Can you remember?
There's an introduction by a scholar, but then there's the foreword by the author that talks about the letters. But yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe I just don't remember.
But I think that if it's a foreword that's fiction, I've never seen that before, and that is wild, and I love it. It's not some note from the author to the reader. It's more fiction. That's a pretty great angle.
Well, you've given me something to go investigate further because I didn't remember that foreword. Probably I didn't read it, actually.
And then my other thought on Country Dance was, she ends up with the Welsh guy, Evan, I think is his name. But neither of those guys seem great. the I think the other
Well,
guy
and that may
was
be the
Gabrielle.
overarching conclusion of a historical novel set in mid-19th century Great Britain.
Yeah, yeah. So at the end, I was like, oh, well, he also seemed like a violent, tempestuous person. Oops. Yeah.
Is that all there is? Yep.
Yeah.
I remember because I watched the video again this morning that I said when I described this book to you, I said the actual plot of it didn't end up meaning as much to me as the various things that it had to say about the border and about language and so on. What was your experience of that? Because it was quite a almost, what would you say, melodramatic plot?
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess of its day, I most important thing for me was, yeah, how they lived.
How
Yeah.
they lived.
What she did during the day and how I think she might even say like how little access they have to world news or anything. Just their parochial in a good way life.
In terms of this being a novella and not a short story, not a novel, what was kind of novella-ish about it?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, well, length.
Length.
One person. Oh, I guess there's actually two kind of settings in it, but yeah, one arc. Not too concerned about her dad who's drinking. For me, the length of it worked. So
I think so. I just think that if it was enlarged to be a novel, it would have been a very different work of literature. Like if some of the other characters had more than kind of walk-on roles and were fleshed out, that it might have been a great novel, but it would have been a very different beast than what it is. I think that its brevity allowed some of these things that were kind of under the surface about the Welsh character speaking English and the English character speaking Welsh, and all the Welsh characters lived on the English side of the border and stuff. That ended up being for me the meat of it, and that might have gotten lost in a larger work,
yeah.
possibly. Now, should it have been a short story? It felt no, I don't think so.
No, I agree with your take on the length it had. Maybe just because it's so old, the time period they're talking about. For me, it had a fairy tale quality to it. I think that's another reason it kind of fits into the novella shape, longer than a short story. A full arc, right to her death, but yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that you enjoyed it. Now, I have not unfortunately found anything else she's written that I enjoyed nearly as much as this. So this may be her one. I haven't tried every one, but there was another one that was a bit longer called Turf of Stone, also with her artwork on the cover that I thought was just really bad. And maybe those are the only two I've tried. I think I've got another one or two left to try, but certainly this novel has got a special place in my pantheon of really great novellas.
I'll reread this one. This is a keeper for my bookshelf.
That's great. All right. So the oldest of the novels you recommended to me was The Snow Goose by Paul Gallico. And I had never heard of this novel until you talked about it in that video. And I don't know where I've been because there were a lot of comments on that video that, oh, what's such a great novella. And I can't believe Shawn's never heard of it. And it's completely passed me by. I did end up finding it too sentimental for my taste, but I also thought it was really, really good. So I wish I had read it at the same stage of life that you first read it, because probably it would have had exactly the same kind of space in my heart. Reading it as an aging queen, there was parts of it just a little too sentimental for me. But I thought it was beautifully written. I loved the language. I loved the plot within the world of the novella. It was very believable that this snow goose would do the things it did in the story, which were quite miraculous. And I'm not sure I have a whole bunch more to say than that. I'm just really glad that I read it because I didn't know it existed. You kind of thought I might find it a little sentimental, and I did, but it was great.
Sentimental and definitely of the books that we're looking at today, some of the most cringeworthy parts. Stuff that just wouldn't fly today. But yeah, I think it is because I read it as a kid. And it's more the feel of it that I like. But maybe this will come up with the month in the country too. There is something I don't. I guess my concern about this book when I looked at it again for this podcast was it's definitely of a Christian style of writing, if that would be right. And I wouldn't have seen it when I read it initially, but I would now.
Christian are having that kind of almost
Yes. And so
allegory.
on the one hand, I love it because it is this allegory, and I think the novella is great for that. Is that the allegory I'm looking for now, or knew I was looking at before? Maybe not.
Yeah, no, but it's definitely worth a read.
Yeah, I think what I like is the actual goose, not the allegorical one, but the actual snow goose from Canada. That's what most appeals to me about this. This is the shortest by far of the 6 books that we read. So yeah, it may, it could be called a long short story, I think.
I agree with you because you showed it to us on the screen, and when I had the book in my hand, it's got huge margins. It kind of reminded me of the way I used to do my high school, university essays.
Same.
Big margins to get the page count to the right count.
And like country dance, the characters are of a type, crippled man, that sort of thing, and the young beautiful girl. So I think it fits for a shorter fable fairy tale style development anyhow.
The fact that it was published during the war, not after the war, but during the war, I mean, it would have had a special resonance, the reception of it would have been connected to that as well. I can see why it would have been really, really popular at that time.
Hopeful, redemptive kind of story.
That was a very interesting experience. What's the next one that on your list, if we're going chronological, what would it be?
A Month in the Country, which 1980?
1980, that's right.
So I was surprised when I saw that date, and I think that's maybe why it stands up better than, say, the Snow Goose. So there's obviously been some reflection about, it's World War One. So some reflection on that and more of a thoughtful take on some of the points it seems to be making. I love this book.
Great.
Novella. It had some things that, well, the first 2 at least that we've talked about didn't have. Had humor. Definitely I had some good laughs in it, and like it's sort of deceptively sparse when in its conversations. It's a more modern style, a lot going on underneath.
Very much so, yeah.
I had some favorite scenes that are memorable, so that's
tell me.
Nice thing too. Well, the piano shopping. I love the piano shopping. And I love the narrator, main character. I loved when he talked about the painting he's renovating, when he talks about, speaking of Christianity, heaven and hell. I loved his description. It was like, that would be a really hard thing to describe what you're painting. It seems super boring, but what he's working on, especially when he calls the people who are dropping down into hell in this big masterpiece, I love that scene.
Oh, it's just so rich. I mean, I just remember it's the kind of scene when I'm reading it, and I've now read it 3 times, that I just kind of fall into it, and it just feels like I'm in a dream. Like it just opens worlds where he's going so many interesting places in what he's thinking about and saying as he's doing it, but it's so capacious that the reader can go even other places. Like it's really rich, absolutely incredible.
The Snow Goose was, didn't say it, but clearly good and bad, yeah, heaven and hell, that kind of thing. And this is, quite a blurring of that, more of a
absolutely
view of war and the fallout and good people and bad people. And sort of speaking of borders, he does seem to spend a lot of time painting this area that's between heaven and hell in the mural.
I don't think I consciously noticed that, but as soon as you say it, I'm shaking my head. Yes.
So I did have an issue with it, though, or a question.
Yeah.
I didn't really buy that he was in love with Alice. ever in it. The woman that comes
The
and
vicar's wife.
yeah, like
Oh,
I thought
really? Oh,
all along he was
interesting.
in love with Moon. I didn't read a single thing about the story before I read it. I thought he was in love with the Moon who's working
The guy
outside.
doing
Yeah.
the find in the
Doing-
grave. Oh,
yeah.
I
Doing
guess you're more of a gay man than I am because I didn't have that reaction.
And so at the end, I'm like, yeah, that for me, I just thought, or maybe for me, for current times, if that wasn't painted as well as I thought it should be painted, written.
Now, that's very interesting. Certainly, the protagonist he's not a lusty man. I
Yeah.
didn't read him as being a closeted gay man. The other character was, and again, we're not worrying about spoilers. The other character we find out fairly late in the novel is gay. Homosexual is in the terminology of the time.
Yeah, I
But I
maybe
did,
love like that, maybe gay love, isn't it? Or maybe loved in friendship, or it just seemed
well,
like
certainly that
deeper
came through.
relationship, deeper relationship than Alice.
Well, we are talking about British men here, Barb, so you got to factor that in.
That's exactly. I will say
That's
one thing,
fascinating. So I'm going to be rereading it within a year, I'm sure. So I'm going to be rereading it with that in my mind to see what I can see.
they do have the Snow Goose and A Month in the Country have these similar scenes where the protagonist, well, in A Month in the Country, the protagonist, yeah, he's in like a bar or a coffee shop, or that's how he finds out that Moon is gay and
Right.
had his issues with that.
Yes.
And then in the Snow Goose, there's a scene with a bunch of guys in a bar or a coffee shop. I don't even know if the narrator's there, or if it's just kind of plunked in, explaining what happened when the guy went in his sailboat to Dunkirk. Those are sort of interesting ways to give information to the
Get a
reader.
bunch of get a bunch of plot out without taking up a bunch of space. Yep.
Yeah, the old coffee shop theme.
Interesting. Now, thinking about your comment about the protagonist, in a certain sense, this is the least autobiographical of J.L. Carr's works of fiction. I've only read one other of his works of fiction, and it was actually his debut, which is a really bad version of this novel. I don't recommend anyone reading it. It's one of the worst books I've read.
As a
Um,
writer, I love to hear that
yes.
you made something good out of something not so good.
I keep thinking someday I'm going to reread it and do some kind of a video essay comparing and contrasting it because I think it would be interesting, possibly interesting for me at least. But most of his other fiction was based on different parts of his life, and he led a fascinating life, and he was a very mysterious person. So the opening scene of his biography is a beautifully written description of the funeral where all these people show up and everybody's looking around. Who the hell are these people? I've known them for 50 years and I've never seen these people. Who are they? Like he just had different compartments that he put people in, and his wife of 40 or 50 years said near the end of her life, I don't really know him. So that I think is also to that degree that protagonist might have been autobiographical, that you didn't really get a sense. He was kept a lot in to himself. Interesting.
Interesting. Very interesting.
The biography is wonderful. It's one of the best literary biographies I've ever read. The Last Englishman, The Life of J.L. Carr by Byron Rogers. J.L. Carr wore many hats. He had been a teacher, a headmaster. He set up his own publishing company, a writer, and he was a map maker, and about 300 or 400 other things like that. He just did so many things. And his his publishing house is still going. His son has it, and you can buy most of the maps that J.L. Carr designed, county maps of England, and this kind of a map, historical map. And all of his works are still in print, and you can buy them from I've forgotten the name of the publishing company, and you can even buy this biography from that company. I am going to buddy read another novel by J.L. Carr next year with my friend Heidi, and I'm going to order my copy direct from that. I think it's called Henningham Publishers or something. I'll put the name in the bottom of the screen. Both they can Google it and it'll put it in the show notes. But yeah, what an interesting man. But this novel stands out, I think, is certainly his masterpiece. And I'm not surprised at all, but absolutely delighted that you loved it.
This book, I was surprised that it won a big writing prize.
It was nominated for the Booker.
For Booker,
It
yeah, I was surprised because in terms of novellas, they usually don't make the cut.
That's right. That's right.
And so that's, I think, a testament to how good it is.
So the next one on my list chronologically is The True Story of Ida Johnson by Sharon Riis. And I did find in my parents' several boxes of books, I found my copy that I talked about going to her reading in Edmonton and got her autographed copy. And so I reread this. I don't know if you remember in our first chat, I said that I remembered there was a scene of the young protagonist having sex with a much older, like a 75 or 80-year-old man and really enjoying it. That was actually not from The True Story of Ida Johnson. She was launching another novella there, which I also bought, Midnight Twilight Tourist Zone. And she read that scene that I've just described thusly from this. And I don't think I ever read this. So I'm looking forward to giving it a try. So The True Story of Ida Johnson, I agree with everything you said about its strengths. It's just a technically brilliant or structurally brilliant. And I love the writing. I struggled with one aspect that is a bit of not a deal breaker, but a bit of an allergy for me. I didn't like how do you pronounce this? The amorality of the protagonist. Ida Johnson. So she killed her family, and she never ever showed any remorse for that, and that she lost me. So what did that say about me? I lose interest in a fictional story where there's no human emotion about that anywhere. Like she never ever. It just kind of, well, this happened, and then I went to Vancouver or whatever. I couldn't care about her because of that. So I'm a wuss, Barb.
I'm with you on that. I had another look at it. Like she doesn't seem to care for anyone. So,
No,
if you want to be loved, be lovable kind of thing, it's
she's a
not happening.
borderline sociopath, really.
Like, and at the very end, Lucy is crying in the apartment, and Ida's like, well, oh well, that's her problem. I thought, oh, ouch!
Yeah,
Isn't she
yeah,
the one person that you like? So
that's
yeah,
right. I often hear people that are much more popular and kind of well connected in the bookish social media world than I am bemoan the criticism that they hear anecdotally when people say, "Well, I didn't like it. I didn't like the main character. She wasn't likable enough," and they kind of poo-poo that. And I kind of need to have somebody to root for in my fiction. Somebody to like. They don't likable is a very subjective thing. What I usually come around to realizing and saying whenever I try to comment on this is I don't need them to be likable, my characters, but I do need to have somebody to root for. And that means that I have to be interested in the characters, not necessarily like them. And an amoral character, I just completely lose interest. So
yeah. There
that's
needs
just
to
me.
be something else tying you to the story. So Lolita, say, terrible protagonist.
Yeah, and
but
I won't read it. I just absolutely refuse to read it for that
but
reason.
but I mean, I read all that book. He is so terrible. He's maybe in like serial killer shows or something so terrible you're kind of wildly interested in how horrible they are. But here it's just like maybe yeah. I just too much of a blank, the person.
And it's too bad because otherwise I loved it. But that's a big otherwise. That's a big thing. But just I love these short little paragraph long chapters or sentence long chapters, and there was humor in it, and It was so clever, innovative. I just wish Ida Johnson had been a little different of a character.
Yeah, same. I think, she's playing like the true story of Ida Johnson. And then at the end, you're thinking, is it true? Is anything true? And at the end, I just was rereading the last few pages, and they say, oh, Lucy, who'd been married once, or was it twice? And by that point, you're kind of like, well, don't you know? So this constant, nothing is true, everything is true. That's certainly not a good theme, I don't think, for, say, a novel. Like, I couldn't have gone on much longer
No.
for Ida Johnson than this length.
If you'd removed all the white space, let's see, because this, with the way it's set out, it's 125 pages. It would probably be 75 pages if you had just regular spacing or whatever. I don't want to dissuade people from giving it a try. If you're the kind of a reader that don't mind or are interested in reading about amoral, kind of sociopathic, murderous characters, if that floats your boat, I think this is a really good work of literature that kind of delves into all that. But I don't like it.
Yeah, I think if you like reading boundary breaking works, like, it's still 2023 boundary breaking in the way it's written and the way the scenes
Absolutely.
are done. It's great that way.
I loved the structure. I loved all that technical innovation. Irreverent is too weak of a word. There's an in-your-face quality to the story, and part of that is, I'm going to make my main character kill her family, and she's not going to show any remorse. So F you if you don't like it. Like, there's something about that energy that I remember from but being in the room with Sharon Riis at that reading years ago when she lit up a cigarette and said, "If you don't like it, get out." That's really appealing. So I'm looking for. Have you read Midnight Twilight Tourist Zone?
I have not. I didn't even know. This is the first I've heard of it.
Okay. Well, I'm pretty sure this was what the occasion of the reading was, the launch of this, and it's also by Douglas and McIntyre, which doesn't exist anymore. 1989. So that's when I would have, 1989 or 1990 is when I would have been there. So maybe we won't make a video about it, but maybe we should buddy read this someday.
Totally interested.
I was just about to say, kind of reflexively, I'm glad I read it, but I'm going to not say that because maybe I wish I hadn't reread it. And I could have kept the memory of it reading it in the 90s that was more positive. Did you reread it, or did you just kind of skim through and reread certain passages?
I reread it, and I did wonder a bit being older, if I have less patience for things being cryptic than I would have, late 80s or 90s, whenever I read it first. Yeah, like I did think, well, like I said, what happened here? I know, but the point of it is you don't know exactly what happened here. So yeah, maybe I'm getting crotchety.
Well, we're just getting more morals as we get older.
Yeah. Probably not a good thing.
Still, it was a very interesting exercise. I recently did an episode of this new series I have on my channel, which I'm hoping to rope Barb Howard into very soon, called Zooming In. One that I recently taped one that recently went up was about the upsides and downsides to rereading. So this might be an example of one where maybe I shouldn't have reread it. I should have just hung on to the happy memories I had and not spoiled them by rereading it.
That's what happened to me in our first show on the novellas. Where
absolutely, with Hemingway and
Jonathan Livingston Seagull.
What's your last one? Oh, I know what it is. Yeah.
The Office of Historical Corrections, and it's the newest by a long shot, 2020.
2020.
Danielle Evans. Yeah. So this was interesting because it was a short story collection and a novella in it, which, as a short story writer and a novella writer, I'm always wishing, can't we just put the novellas alone?
Oh, I agree. I absolutely agree.
Like, it takes away from the visual, the feel, all this. So it's, in some ways, it's hard not to think of it as just the longest short story of the book when it's set up like this. I don't think it is. What I think, oh, but a funny, a great voice. It was for me in the ones that I read this week, the least allegorical or the least, standing for another thing. But of course, it is standing for a super important current day thing, and historical corrections is big. It's my first. I read the novella first in the book, and so it's my first reading of Danielle Evans, and that was a great opportunity. Thank you. I had an issue. I feel like same issue as Country Dance. I did wonder. No, Country Dance, the two guys were essential to the story, but in the Office of Historical Corrections, the two guys in it, I thought, why are they in this? And so I felt this novella could be edited.
Oh, interesting. So let me refresh my memory. She has two X's. One is white and one is black, and that's who you're talking about?
Yeah. And
So you
so
didn't think they necessarily needed to be there.
when we, said like that, it sounds like, of course, it's relevant to this story, which is about, how whites might put up a historical sign on a spot and how blacks might put it up, and also where the truth might be neither of those. But I don't think these guys' attitude. I skimmed the scenes when she was with them quite a bit
Well, that's the sign of something being too long, right? We talked about that in the first, that by definition, a novella doesn't have anything that you want to skim. So
yeah.
well, interesting. I didn't have that reaction, but we all read different books when we read the same book. We all read different novellas when we read the same novella.
Yeah, I feel like what I'm saying today is I don't, I've got a complaint about all the love interests, but that's not really how I usually read. But here, yeah, when I did think afterwards, why those guys? So there probably is a reason. She's a very good writer and probably would serve me to do a second reading.
Just my vague memory of them in the story was to the degree that I thought about it at all, I thought that was just a personal manifestation of some of the social political issues that were being addressed in other ways to give it that to address it on that level as well, and it worked for me. But interesting. So you read you read the short stories as well?
Yeah, well, I haven't read them all.
Great.
Short stories I love. I think they're super tight. They have this same I don't know what the word would be, funny, sassy tone.
Yes.
But about underlying big topics.
Important social political issues. Yes.
Yeah, that are current right now. And so yeah, the thing I love most about reading this novella was getting introduced to the short stories.
And that's fascinating. Do you think the Office of Historical Corrections text should have been condensed down to short story length?
Yeah, I didn't look at it that closely, but certainly for me, could have been shorter.
Let's see, how long is it?
For me, the most interesting.
It's about 100 pages. It's just about 100 pages, so maybe not quite a shorter novella. Short novella. It should have been a short novella.
Yeah, like for me, what was interesting was, of course, the job she does of correcting historical
record wherever it appears.
Yeah. And her friendship with this childhood friend, and they're both super smart and in similar roles, and how they go about them differently, politely or more assertively, or that for me was the guts of it, or maybe that's what most appealed to me.
Yes, that was the main part of it for me too. Yes. Well, so this is interesting because Danielle Evans has written, her first collection is Before You Suffocate Your Own True Self, and it is all short stories, and they're as good as the short stories here. So I did think the novella was strong, but
so maybe just that this was her first run, or maybe they said, we need your book to be so many pages. You got anything? And she said, I have a novella. It's all, I mean, I guess it's not uncommon to title a collection with a novella in it with the novella's name. But also sometimes you just asked to fill it in, and she might have said, I have a novella. I don't know.
I didn't anticipate your criticism of it, because if I had, I would have done some research, but I think you might be a little bit in the minority in terms of having that issue. So, but I don't know that for sure. I'm certainly going to go and check out their other reviews to see if other people thought that the novella was weaker than the stories. Yeah, that's interesting.
I probably, yeah. Hope maybe it's just me.
Well, very interesting. Well, I'm glad you like her writing and her short stories, and I can't wait for her next book. She is one of my very most favorite contemporary writers. My last book is one that I am unfortunately I didn't finish, but I'm about 60% of the way through, and I intend to, and that is the one that I said that I definitely wasn't going to read. Tim Krabbé's The Rider, published in about 1978 in Dutch, translated from the Dutch by Sam Garrett, and that was quite a bit later. I think that was in 2002. And to my surprise, I'm really enjoying it. I don't know if well, yeah, there's a lot about it that I'm loving. I didn't know anything about professional bicycle racing. I've never watched any of it ever on TV. And I've been Google reading this from and learning so much about it, and it's fascinating. So it's just as you described. It's incredibly well written. The translation, or incredibly well translated. Doesn't read like a translation, whatever that means. It's funny. It's that kind of stream of consciousness, kilometer by kilometer, that you described so well. That's exactly what it is, and just the flow of his consciousness and all the other things about him. I think it's a work of autofiction. It's based on its real experience in life. It's really, really good. So it's a hit. And like I say, I got 40% left to read. I don't imagine it's not gonna go south. He might fall in a ditch or two, but I don't think the novella's gonna go south in the last bit. Obviously got a library copy here, but yeah, it's good.
Yeah, it's an interesting, like the sports stories are you win or you lose. So to try and make those more interesting or literary I think it's kind of amazing that he did it in this format.
Yeah, you either win or lose, and he is condensing that into kilometer by kilometer. You either win or lose, and the up and down of his confidence and his physical power, physical strength, and all of that ebbing and flowing, and it's like little bite-sized chapters about how he gets from 1 kilometer to the next and what goes through his mind. I just think it's really quite brilliant.
But if someone told you that, or someone told me they were writing that, I would think that sounds like a terrible idea. That sounds
Yes.
super boring. But yeah, kept me going.
Had you been interested in cycling? What's the word? I'm not even sure. In English? What would you call it? Bicycle racing? Is that the right word?
Yeah, I mean, no, I don't watch the Tour de France. I think this race that he is in is a stage in it maybe now or something. I don't pay any attention to it.
Did it make you? It hasn't made you pay attention after having read it. I'm
No.
curious to watch a little bit of one just to make connections to what I read to that. But no, I'm not going to become a devotee unless there's some cute bicyclists out there that I discover. That might get me more interested.
There's some cute one. I was cycling yesterday and I thought of this book in the middle of the ride, which says something I just thought of, imagine thinking you could do this, write a story about it. Yeah.
I maybe particularly enjoyed the reminiscences of his as a much younger man, because he started, as you said, in the first part one of this. He didn't really get into it until his very late 20s. And I think he's in his early 30s during the race. But he had gotten interested in it as a teenager, and those reminiscences which come back to him as he's cycling, I thought were really quite. It was something about with just a regular kid's bike or teenager's bike, he'd ride into his front yard, and then he'd jump off the bike while it was still moving, and then there was a clock in the window. It was just very intense, and I had to read it a couple of times to even visualize how that would work, but just very vivid. So
He does. I just noticed today before we talked, I went through the book and he has these clips My Sporting Life or The History of My Sporting Life, I think they're called. They're just tiny. I had completely forgot they were even in there. And they go backwards in time. They start like in whatever,
Oh, yeah.
78, and then they go back, and the one at the very end of the book, I think, is maybe 1954 or something. It's so there's a lot more craft going on than you think originally when just think he's clunking through the kilometers. Yeah.
Are you a chess player, Barb?
No, no,
Oh, neither am I. So neither one of us were into cycling, and we enjoyed his cycling novella. Are we going to read one of his chess novellas now?
does he have one?
Oh, doesn't he?
I don't know. I didn't look up
I just
anything
assumed.
he
I
wrote.
just assumed he did because he's known as a chess player too, right?
It's an interesting combination.
Well, this was a very fruitful exercise. I'm so glad that we did this, and I think we might do this next year. What do you? We don't have to commit to it, but we'll talk later on about whether we might do. Yeah, yeah. In terms of what makes a good novella, and in terms of length and all of the other things, how many characters, how many themes, I think it's been very useful for me to focus on that while I'm reading and appreciate how much I, as a reader, gravitate toward the novella form. So it's been really an eye opener for me. Barb, this was so much fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Shawn. It's always great.